Jesus, we pray these things. Amen. You may be seated.
Thanks to our worship team of 3 this morning. I don't know if you noticed that. Yeah, it's not only are they very capable and skilled, but technology also serves as well. And so just so grateful for them. I was thinking as we were singing that last song, there's a line in there that says, you are here, so it is well. And I always think of the story in the Bible, in the New Testament, where the disciples are in the boat with Jesus, and the storm comes up, and Jesus is doing what? It's all of your favorite pastime, sleeping. And the disciples are freaking out, and they're like, hey, we're going to die here. And Jesus wakes up and just kind of calms the storm. And I always think of that as we sing that song, like, because he's here, whether he's in the boat or in our lives, there's a peace that we hopefully experience and know that is ours because of his presence. Before we go to the message, one thing just by way of teaser, and I'm really excited about this. Unfortunately, you're not going to see anything on the screen because it's still kind of in the incubator being developed. But I just want to I want to cast a vision for something that you're going to hear more about over the next probably couple to 3 weeks. We have an opportunity with the school district, to offer what is going to be called a homework help program. It's not a tutoring program per se. It's really just intended to be a homework help program. If you're parents, you know that homework in your home is the most non-Jesus time in your day, right? Yeah, you laugh because you're guilty. You don't exactly feel lovey-dovey towards your kid. They don't probably feel lovey-dovey towards you. So we want to help change that by offering what we're just calling homework help. It's going to be once a week starting later this fall at one of the local schools. It's going to be open to any school or any kid in the district, grades 3 through 12. And in order to make that program go, guess what we have to have? We have to have huge buy-in from all of you just to say, hey, I can do a Tuesday a month, or I can do 2 Tuesdays a month for an hour and a half, whatever that may look like. You'll hear more about those details, but I just want to lob that to you to begin thinking, praying, dialoguing about. Listen, you do not need to be an engineer, although engineers will take you. You do not need to be an educator. You do not need to be a scientist or a chemist or anything. You just need to hopefully be able to sit next to a child, a student, and just say, hey, I can help you get through this, and offer a little bit of homework help. But that program is 1,000% dependent upon at least 20 or more of you saying, I'm in. So in the next few weeks, we're gonna roll that out in official capacity, but we're really just completely dependent upon, at least, like I said, our magic number feels like 20, but we'd really love 30. That way we can rotate you at a reasonable rhythm without you needing to feel like I have to be there every single week. So I know some of you right now are like, I'm in, great, and we're looking forward to connecting with you. I know there's probably more of you that are like, sound interesting. Just come do it. If the fifth grader's smarter than you, so be it. But you saved the fight at home. That's what we're after. So anyhow, we've been wanting to diversify our community engagement. We do a lot of ice cream, maybe you noticed. And we were like, hey, what would it look like for us to do something else that's really just helping to meet practical needs in our community? And so this idea was birthed, and I'm really excited. So you'll hear more about that in a few weeks. So We're stepping back into a new series that we kicked off last week entitled One Motion. It's a short series. It's only going to be 4 weeks total today and then the next couple of weeks. By the way, next week, a really good friend of mine, a mentor of mine, will be here as a guest speaker. You won't want to miss. His name is Tim. You won't want to miss Tim. He's going to be continuing us in this series, and he's a phenomenal man. He's a 30-year, now retired 30-year church planter in Costa Mesa, California, which is a little bit of heaven on earth if you've never been there. But now they're retired, and he's traveling the country, just encouraging, working with pastors like myself. He's been a great friend, and he'll be here next week to continue us in week 3 of this. But today is me, week 2 of this series. By way of review, you probably saw this image last week. We call it the Great Commission Engine diagram, however you want to think of it. We said, if you remember, you can leave that up there for me, that being a church for the one, and that's borrowing from the language of Jesus, right? So we looked at the parable that Jesus told of which of you, if he has 100 sheep and one wanders away, won't leave the 99 to go get the one, right? That was the parable that Jesus told. And so we said if we want to be a church that's really committed to growing by seeing people come to Jesus, re-engage spiritually that maybe were previously disengaged, then there's some things that have to be true about us, and namely that we have to be living into this great commission that Jesus has given us in Matthew chapter 28, which we do there with the help of a ministry called Intentional Churches. You heard me talk about that last week. Have kind of partnered with them to say, all right, what are those pieces that need to be in place in order for us to really be a great commission type church that is really committed to growth, not programmatically, not by sheep swapping, but really by seeing new people step into the faith for the very first time, or people come back that have been distanced. And this is where we landed to say, if we're going to be intentional and obedient about being a church for the one, all 3 of these pistons, so to speak, in the Great Commission engine have to be firing in unison in one motion. And last week, in week 1 of our series, we considered the first piston, which is dynamic worship. And we considered the Bible's command, really, the command from the Scripture for us to gather together for worship. Primarily, we said for us, primarily that happens here on Sundays at Cienega. Not exclusively, but primarily. So good job, you made it back. You're checking that first piston really well. The others that didn't, I don't really know what to say to them, but I'm glad you're here. And those watching online, good morning. Last week we beat up on them a little. So this week, week 2 of the series, I want to consider the second piston that's kind of there in that Great Commission engine, which for us is what we describe as life-changing relationships. Life-changing relationships. So the foundation of life, all of life, no matter the context, whether in our homes, whether in our workplace, whether in the classroom, whether on the sports field, in our places of recreation, certainly in our churches, all of life is built on relationships exclusively. That's the primary reason that if you were here previously with us, we did the One Another series just recently, because we believe that the foundation of life is relationships. We can be as theologically rich as we want to be, but if we get relationships wrong, it's all in vain. The Bible has so much to say about relationships, the nature of relationships. And so as we start exploring this second piston, which again, from the Great Commission engine, I want us to be aware of this kind of foundational truth that we're going to establish this morning, that everything else gets built upon for us today, and that is this: relationships are God's good gift to us. Relationships are God's good gift to us. Now, some of you are sitting there thinking, I'm not so sure about that. I can tell you about some relationships that don't feel like a good gift. I get that. We live in a fallen world. People act like humans sometimes, don't they? But relationships, at its core, relationships are God's good gift to us. If you were to go back to the beginning of human history, which for us, as a believer of the Bible, it seems like that was the story of Adam and Eve. Before Adam and Eve, you had God. It just existed forever. So that was the beginning of human history. You'll notice in that story that God took the initiative to give us relationships. In other words, relationships were God's design right from the beginning. Let me show you what I mean. This is Genesis chapter 2, verse 18. The Lord God said, this is after Adam had been created, "It's not good for man to be alone. I will make a helper suitable for him." And then, of course, we get the story of Adam and Eve, right? So this is part of the creation story, marked by, this is what I want us to see, marked by God taking the initiative to give us relationships with other people. In this case, it was the story of Adam and Eve, companionship. So the point is simple, and this is the first block that we have to build the rest of them on top of, is that relationships are God's good gift to us. It's like so many things in the world today. We didn't invent them. We didn't invent it. God invented it. God invented the family. He invented love. He invented relationships. All of those things are God's design and gift to us. He initiated it. He created it. He set the parameters around that. He defined what it is, and it's his good gift to us. So with that kind of as our first block, we're going to build off of last week, again, looking at a passage that we looked at last week, which is Acts chapter 2, which kind of set the foundation, if you remember, for that first piston of dynamic worship. And it does so, I think, for us, again, today, for the second one. This is a passage I think we're probably becoming increasingly familiar with because of the Empowered series that we've been in as well. So this is Acts 2, 42 to 47. You probably know this well by now if you've been with us. It says they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching, so that's that dynamic worship, right? And note this, fellowship, to the breaking of bread and to prayer. Everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. All the believers were together and had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. That's dynamic worship, coming together for the purpose of worship. But then note this, they broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. So we see both of those first pistons in that text, don't we? This is a description, if you're unfamiliar with what I just read, this is the description of the early church. Long before we had something called Sundays at Cienega. I know some of you came believing we're the first ever church. Thank you. It's a high compliment to us. We're not. There's some other pieces of church history that existed before Sundays at Cienega. They're not near as important, of course, but they're there. Anyhow, long before we had this, long before we had this. And we asked, what did the church look like? What did it look like? This is the answer for us. Acts chapter 2 describes what it looked like for us. And so if we can draw a parallel to the early church, that's my intent, draw a parallel between the early church and our church today, we could use verse 46 specifically to kind of do that. And it says this, every day they continue to meet together in the temple courts. So you could pause there. While their public worship gathering was more frequent than ours every day, we haven't tried that yet, although I think they have school here Monday through Friday, so I'm not sure how that would shake out, but maybe we should ask. Anyhow, they were gathering together daily for public worship. More frequent, but the same thing. We can draw the parallel to our weekly gathering. I would say as a church, we are faithfully doing that. We are faithfully coming together every week for the purpose of worship. What's the next part of that verse? They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts. So again, just to draw the parallel to our context, in our context specific to LBC, we would call that life groups, which I'm going to talk a bit more about in a few minutes. Exclusively? No. There are other forms in which this happens, the same way there are other forms in which dynamic worship happens outside of just the hour and 15 minutes that we're together every week. There are other forms and ways that these relationships happen, but one of the contexts for us, one of the major contexts for us at LBC is within what we would call life groups. More on that in a moment. But what I'm hoping we'll see is that the relational overflow of that corporate worship gathering extended beyond that into relationships outside of that gathering. So if you notice in verse 46, what were they doing? Gathering together in the temple for worship and, oh, by the way, meeting together in their home, breaking bread together with glad and sincere hearts. So there was an overflow. Piston 1, you could argue, fired piston 2. As piston 1 started to fire, piston 2 started to fire as well. So keeping the language of the Great Commission, as that first piston of dynamic worship begins to fire, what happened? It fueled that second one, which in this case, I would describe it as life-changing relationships. And here's the reality of relationships. A good majority of them we don't get to pick. Have you noticed that? Like, you didn't get to pick the family that you were born into. You didn't. I mean, I guess you had some choice in where you worked, but some of those relationships are out of your control. Even a gathering like this, these relationships weren't pre-selected, predetermined. We didn't stand at the door and screen some of you, although we probably should have, but you all made it in. And so these relationships weren't hand-selected. Instead, they're formed out of whoever shows up. And the relationships in your workplace are formed out of whoever decides to work there. And so there are many beautiful relationships that have been formed because of it, right? But those relationships, as they began to take root for us and also in the early church, they began expanding beyond just that gathering. They began expanding beyond just that corporate gathering that they were doing daily in their case, the gathering in the temple. It went from something like, these are people that we worship with, to these are people that we live life with. And we're in their lives beyond just the temple gathering. These are people that we worship with, and it gave way to, in this case, life-changing relationships. It gave way to, these are people that we do life with. They're eating together in their home, breaking bread with glad and sincere hearts. It seems as though the early church found something really uniquely powerful in those relationships, something greater than they had ever experienced before. And there's a little detail here that I'll give you. Those last two words of verse 36 are the words sincere hearts. It can translate to mean hearts that are truly open. It's not that they were just sincere, but they were actually like open and exposed and vulnerable. There's a translation there that kind of gives way to they had hearts that were truly open. In other words, there were no areas of their life, it seems, there were no areas of their life that were closed off. There were no followers of Jesus who were isolating themselves. And one of the things we talked about last week, one of the lingering effects of COVID, if you remember me talking briefly about that, is that it sort of confused us about God's good plan for the church, right? One of those lingering effects still, too, is the aspect of isolation. But in the early church, you had no followers of Jesus who isolated themselves, not physically, not emotionally. They were together, breaking bread in their homes with hearts that were truly open. That's the translation of that. One of the reasons that we believe so strongly in what we call life groups here at LBC is that we understand that this weekly gathering that we're a part of has some unintentional limitations around it, one being time, right? One being time. But when you get outside of this gathering, and when you get into someone's home and you just have time to linger together, hearts begin to truly open up. And that's what they were seeing and experiencing in the early church. The temple gathering gave way to the home gathering, and in the home gathering, they were doing it with glad and sincere hearts that were truly open, hearts that were truly open. I'll talk again extensively about life groups in a moment, but I'll just give you a real-life example from the life group that I'm a part of. My wife and I are a part of a group. When everybody shows up, it's too big, so we always pray, like, hopefully somebody's not going to come, and it usually works out that way. God usually answers our prayer, so that's fine. But last Sunday, we were together as a life group, and we always have a time of sharing, and it's just what you'd expect. You just go around the circle, and person by person shares highs, lows, good things, challenging things, and it takes us, I don't know, the better part of an hour or more to get around the circle. And by the time we were done last week, as I was just reflecting on it, we had gone around the circle, and we had no fewer than probably 4 or 5 people that had shared really heavy things through tears. And as I think about what it looks like to have hearts that are truly open, that's what it looks like. And that's what they were experiencing in these relationships that were being birthed out of their corporate worship gathering. As they started to get into each other's lives, their hearts were truly open. And the home, in my opinion, the home is low barrier. Maybe you've noticed that. It's safe. It feels welcoming. We do our absolute best to make this gathering feel that way, but there are unintentional limitations around this gathering. If I just had 4 or 5 people come up here and just start sharing about their lives and they're all crying, you would be like, well, this is interesting. And so there are unintentional limitations around this gathering. But the home is different, and the home is disarming. And what takes place there, in my opinion, is a reflection of what what the early church was experiencing. There's one more thing here in Acts 2 for us to see. It says, every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoy the favor of all the people. Notice what the outcome was. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. What was the outcome? Growth. What was the order? It seems as though the order was regularly worshiping together, regularly gathering together in the context of the home and sharing life together, and then came the outcome, growth. The Lord started adding to their number day by day those who were being saved. What was the order? Worship, gathering together relationally, growth. And there's a trend, I think, as I see it, among churches today, and probably to some degree any organization maybe is guilty of this, but certainly churches are guilty of trying to find the quote-unquote get big fast pill. Like it's usually done programmatically. So if we just offer the right program that no one else is doing, then we'll grow and we'll grow fast. And there's this, and who can blame us, right? There's this unhealthy desire to just grow and grow and grow and grow and grow. And it's usually done programmatically. And so I would argue that what gets sacrificed along the way is the slow and, quite honestly, the hard work of building life-changing relationships. What was contributing to the growth of the early church? Relationships. As people started to share life together and their hearts were open, people who weren't yet a part of that started to look and go, there's something uniquely different about that gathering. It wasn't some flashy program. Programs are easier because you can do them quick and they're usually clean and predictable. Relationships are the exact opposite. They're slow and they're messy. The growth of the church came as a result of regular worship and the relationships that they were investing with, and it took time. I mean, it just says day by day the Lord is adding to their number. So here's something for us to consider. Disciples are best made in the context of relationships. Disciples are best made in the context of relationships. Disciples, what does it mean? Becoming more and more like Jesus, right? He had his disciples. He was investing in them. He was pouring into them. He was teaching them. And then he was instructing them, now you go and do likewise. So when we use that term, I get it, it's Christianese, it's a church word, but that's the basic idea. Disciples becoming more and more like Jesus. That happens best in the context of relationships. It's quite honestly, it's flattering that you come here on a Sunday morning and you sit and you listen to myself or whoever's up here for 35 or whatever, however many minutes. It's flattering to me, but I'm also distinctly aware, as I hope you are, that it's grossly insufficient in giving you everything you need to become a mature disciple of Christ. It's just not enough. It's like going to the gym once a week and then just eating McDonald's 3 meals a day for the rest of the week. Is going to the gym helpful? It is, but it's not sufficient if the rest of your life is detached in that capacity. And so I love that you come. It helps me to keep my job. But it is not enough for you in helping you to become a mature disciple of Jesus. You need more. I need more. And relationships with others, especially those who are walking in the same direction spiritually that you are towards Christ, is one of the best tools in making that happen. There's another passage that I want us to see that I think forms the foundation of this second Great Commission engine piston that we're exploring. It's 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, verses 6 through 8. Let me give you the context. The book of 1 Thessalonians was a letter written by Paul to the church in Thessalonica. Really original with the names, as you figured out by now, right? And in this chapter, he's reminding them of the nature of what their ministry and their visit was like among them. And look how he describes it. This is 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, verses 6 to 8. It says this: "We were not looking for praise from people, not from you or anyone else, even though as apostles of Christ we could have asserted our authority." In other words, we were entitled to praise and recognition, but that's not what we were looking for. Instead, we were like young children among you, Just as a nursing mother cares for her children, so we cared for you. Note this part. Because we loved you so much, we were delighted to share with you not only the gospel of God, but our own lives as well. What was Paul saying to them? Here's what he was saying. You can jot this down. The gospel created a community characterized by love. The gospel created a community characterized by love. The gospel message, which Paul and others who were with him so faithfully carried from city to city. In fact, when we go back into our Empowered series in the book of Acts in a few weeks, the section that we're going to kind of step back into is what are often called Paul's missionary journeys, where he was traveling around and they were planting churches and they were investing in leaders and things like that. More on that when we go back to it. But the gospel message, which Paul and others were so faithfully carrying from city or from town to town, city to city, compelled them beyond the message of the gospel to seeing actual communities formed that were characterized by love. I think Paul, similar to what I just said a moment ago about this gathering, would understand like there's some level of vanity if this is all that there is. That I just preach at you every week and tell you what you should do, but it actually never takes root in your life or in my life. And so Paul and others were seeing that the gospel was created communities that were characterized by love. What did he say? We were delighted to share with you not only the gospel of God, pretty big deal, but our lives as well. Like there was. I mean, we can draw whatever sort of conclusions we want, but there was some period of time where Paul and others were relationally just investing into these people. And it was an overflow of the gospel message that they carried with them. What a beautiful picture that is for us today. I love this quote that I came across about this particular passage. It says this: "It's easier to teach theology," which is what I'm sort of doing right now. It's easier to teach theology than to love. It's easier to share list than time. Paul gave not only the message of the gospel, but the example of it as well. He spent time. He shared joys and headaches. It goes on to say, love is not just a job, it is a way of life. I just love that so much. It's easier to teach theology than to love, easier to share list than time. Paul gave not only the message of the gospel, but the example of it as well. I tell our team often, I don't think that money is people's greatest commodity anymore. I think it's their time. There's enough money in the world to go around. There is. I mean, just look no further than professional athletics. There's tons of money in the world. It's misallocated, but there's tons of money in the world. Time is finite. Time is finite. And you and I only have so much of it. And therefore, investing in relationships takes some of your margin of life if you give it to that. And it is easier to share lists than time because relationships take time. Relationships are messy. In Paul's ministry, you see a balance, don't you? He did share the gospel, the truth of the cross, the need for forgiveness. I mean, he led with that. He was unapologetically preaching the gospel, and he also shared his life. And it's a model for the church today. Arguing, sometimes you see churches arguing about, well, should we be about preaching the gospel or about being relationally oriented and meeting needs and sharing life together? That's like arguing which wing of the airplane is more important. Really. You need both. At least the plane I fly on, I want to have both. Both are equally as important, and as we established earlier, as the gospel is shared, it creates communities of love. And within those communities, life-changing relationships are formed and enjoyed. And here at LBC, we have 4 core values. They all start with the letter T. Makes it easier for at least me to remember, maybe you as well. And they are truth, table, time, and transformation. Those are the 4 values that we really try and lean into. The second value, that of the table, you're now putting the pieces together because I'm wearing the shirt. The second value, that of the table, comes directly from this 1 Thessalonians chapter 2 context, sharing our lives together, which again, we believe happens so powerfully in the context of someplace beyond here. We like to say the home because that's where a lot of us have a table. And the table, traditionally, although the world, technology is trying to change that, but the table traditionally represents what? A place that you gather and that you're together. When we talk about this value and we use this image of the table, we have in mind exactly the model of the early church, breaking bread together in one another's homes. That's exactly what we are leaning into. And I mentioned earlier that for us here at LBC, one of the primary ways that we believe these life-changing relationships are fostered are within the context of what we here call life groups. If you're unfamiliar with life groups, other churches call them community groups, or I don't know what they call them, groups, whatever. Different names, same idea, but it's just intended to be a smaller gathering of people, ranging anywhere from probably 10 to 30, depending on the group. Families, kids, college students, single individuals, widowed individuals, gathering together regularly to do three things as we so desire: to share food together, to share life together, and to grow together spiritually. Those are the primary things we have in mind when we talk about that. And recently we pulled together some of our life group leaders to capture a video that just about what life groups are and what they mean to some of those folks who are leading them. You'll notice not all of our life group leaders were available and made it into the video, but we did capture a good number of them. And so I just want you to watch this video with me, and then we'll come back.
Part of my story is I grew up in church, spent the majority of my 20s and 30s distancing myself. Do I really need a church family? Do I need a body to belong to? A person who now is one of my closest friends invited us to a home group. It really became a vehicle for me to dive deep into my faith, really understanding what my relationship with Christ is, and it's helped me to become a better father, husband, the benefits of it, I never would have seen coming.
A year before we ever launched Living Branch Church, I was playing golf with a good friend, a pastor here in town by the name of Brian Lee. Brian has since passed and gone to heaven to be with Jesus. He was a 10-year church planter at that point, and I remember asking Brian, you're 10 years into church planting, if you could go back and do one thing differently, what would it be that you would do different? And first words out of his mouth were, I would have started life groups sooner. In that moment, when there were still so many pieces undetermined for Living Branch Church, one of the things that had already been determined was life groups were going to be a part of our DNA.
A life group just gives you that one-on-one time to really get to know somebody personally, their lives outside of church, and just develop those relationships that you don't get to do just once a week on a Sunday.
We've had people go through some really difficult times, and just watching the whole group gather around them in prayer and support and checking in on them to see how they're doing. And we can weep with those who weep and rejoice with those who rejoice.
Life's better connected. It is very much better connected. I mean, if somebody in the group has an illness or a death or something happen in their family, we're all there to offer prayer, a listening ear, food, whatever. We're just consistently there for each other, and that makes life so much better.
I had congestive heart failure, and people from our life group were the ones who came to the hospital and visited.
Rallied around us.
Yeah.
Life group has become like a family.
Our ultimate goal and hope and deepest desire is that people would discover a life-changing relationship with Christ. The first time through the door, some people just aren't there, and they're just not ready to make that decision. And so we want to walk beside them and help shepherd them towards that decision point, that faith in Jesus. Life groups we want to be a place for that as well, and we've seen that happen in quite a few groups that we have. In 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, Paul says, because we loved you so affectionately, we were pleased to impart to you not only the gospel, but our own lives.
At the beginning, we do a fellowship. We spend probably about 45 minutes, about 45 minutes, and we do a potluck. So we eat, and then we go off to our study.
You want to be able to do your life with the people in your life group. You eat together, you play games together. And so one of the powerful things is as you learn together, and as you grow in your walk with God together, and as you grow in relationship to each other, as you put those things into practice in the normal everyday life, that's where a lot of the spiritual fruit starts to show up.
We also see a lot of our life group people either like on headset while we're playing video games together or something. So we've all just kind of integrated into each other's lives enough that we keep in touch pretty often.
I think we tend to forget and we don't necessarily see God and see how He has His hand in everything. So I think it takes being part of a community and really just being able to hear other people's stories and see how God is working in them to remind me, to remind us, all of us, how He is really present and He has His hand in everything.
Seeing the Bible applied in each individual family's life, we have so many of those stories to draw on from other people and say, God brought me through this, God brought me through that, and that's that constant refreshing and refocusing on the things that are really important.
You're able to really start to develop deeper relationships with people, and you're able to kind of enter into the good of people's lives and the heart of people's lives, and I think that to me is like where it gets real.
Because of the relationships that we've been able to establish and that I think have been blessed by God and nurtured by God, even though we're all in these crazy different walks of life, we have this community, we have this fellowship, and even if I have or have not walked in those specific shoes, we have those bonds of trust to be able to empathize and support and relate and really come together.
They're like my Calvary. That's kind of how I see them. Whether it be physical support, moving, spiritual support, prayer, emotional conversations. They've been incredibly significant in that sense, and I'm very, very grateful.
There's so many times you feel like you're struggling with something and nobody else has that struggle. One of the things that's nice about being in the group is these things come out and you realize I'm not the only one that struggles with that, and that you can feed off of one another and you can learn.
There's an old expression that you can impress people from afar, but you impact them up close. And as I think about life groups, I think that's where true transformation and impact really happens. If you're connected to our community, but you're not yet connected to a life group, I just want to gently push you to consider taking that step to get connected today. They are the backbone of who we are as a church and makes us all more Christ-like.
So that's thank you to our good friend Sean who produced that video for us, and to our incredible life group leaders who I'm going to actually invite up here just to introduce them to you really quick. If you're a life group leader in the room today, you should come up here at this time and make your way right down here in front. You can clap for these incredible people. Come on. Someone's got to be first, Clint. All the way over. There you go. Hey, you all are wearing the same shirt. That's weird. Worked out. Come on. Yeah, just all the way across the front here, guys. I just asked them if they would come up here. You saw a lot of them in the video. You didn't see all of them. And by the way, not all of them could be here today. We have a few that are not here with us today. But I'm just going to have them, I'm going to give them the microphone and give them a chance to go down the row here. Just name and like maybe what day of the week you meet and what area of our community you're in. No jokes, nothing that we haven't rehearsed. We good? All right, this is a big moment. Kendra, my wife, is going to start us off there. Kendra, you go first, babe, for us. Yeah.
I'm Kendra. Well, I wasn't
when we
listening.
meet, where we meet.
Oh, we meet. Sorry. We meet at our house Sunday nights, and it's wonderful.
Yeah, about every third week.
About every third week.
We are Brian and Lisa Mappus. We meet in Vail. We meet on Fridays at 6, about every third Friday.
I'm Paul, and this is my wife, Jean. We meet at the La Chapelle's house.
We all know where that is. Thank you. That's helpful.
Oh, let me get there. It's in the 85730 zip code.
That narrows it down.
Cross streets.
No, we don't need that. You're good. Okay. I'm just messing with you.
And it's every other Monday night.
We are Kirk and Wendy Walker. We meet every Tuesday night
in
the community of Savano, which is at Drexel and Houghton.
I'm Delaney Morris, and this is my husband, Ricky, and we co-lead with the Westbury, so I will let them introduce themselves.
I'm Clint, and this is Sarah, and we co-lead together, like she said, and we meet every third Thursday, and in Corona Day Tucson, so we're the Corona
Go
group.
Corona, anybody?
Yeah.
All
Corona
right,
group.
yeah, you're all tired because you had about an hour drive here this morning.
Hi, we're Joel and Courtney Lyman. We meet every other Friday and right over here on Atterbury Wash.
Oh, yeah. Guess it's my turn. I'm Joe. This is Aaron. We meet roughly every other week. We try to be dynamic because our group tends to have a lot of younger families. So we have a lot of kids running around, and that's okay. So on Saturdays, most of the time.
Thank you.
Yeah.
This is Michelle, and I'm Keith. We meet on the second and fourth Thursday nights at 6:30, and we meet basically in the Savannah area as well.
All right. Hey, can we show our appreciation for these life group leaders again? Wait, don't go. Don't go. Before you go, I just want to publicly say to all of you, you are helping us to really live into this Great Commission engine by providing a platform and a space for this to happen. And so thank you. Well done. Thank you, guys. You can have a seat. I should mention that Nick and Caitlin Griffiths are a couple of our leaders who are not here this morning. And then we're really excited. We're starting a new group over in the Rocking K development where they're building more homes than people, but whatever. That group will be led by Brian and Cassie Wallen, starting here very soon as well. So these beautiful people that you just saw, they're easy to identify. They're all wearing this shirt. They're going to be around and available, hopefully sort of in the back on the patio. If you have a question, you just want to get a real taste of like, hey, what would it look like to be a part of this? Certainly go and talk to them. I also just want to make you aware of how you can take this next step. This would be a lost opportunity if I didn't do that. If you go to there's a number of different ways. If you go to the virtual bulletin that we've provided, there's a spot where you can scroll down that says get connected or something like that, and you click on that, it'll take you to that page where you can see the groups that you just heard from, these leaders, and then there's a form that you can go and fill out. And so one of the things that I should tell you is, like, even if you identified your favorite people up here, may not be that you necessarily end up in that group. We're always giving consideration to space, availability, and then what works for your schedule as well. And we try to offer diversity of areas around our community as well as days of the week, but sometimes it can be hard to find that good fit. So, but if you go to our website, you go to the Connect tab, you go to Life Groups, same thing. There will be a list there that you can look. You see all those names there. I don't know if we have the Rocking K one up yet, but we will soon. And then there's a form, and you just fill out that form. It comes directly to us. We get on the phone with you or over email and just try and figure out where would be a good spot for your group as well. So there's a number of different ways. Also the Connect card on the chairs, snail mail, so to speak. You can check that box, drop it on your way out, and then someone will follow up with you as well this coming week. But I just can't express enough how much I believe in the value of these groups. You heard me talk about it in the video. Really good friend, now passed and gone to heaven, but he just emphatically said this is so critical that you do as you're planting and launching a church, that you create space for groups. And so we've tried to be intentional about that. I should have also told you that Paul, who you not only saw up here, but he kind of spoke first in that video. Paul's kind of running alongside of me, helping to give direction and oversight to our life group ministry. So a lot of things that flow through life groups hit him at some point. So Paul may be a point of contact for you specifically afterwards today if you're more interested in that. But this is the context where life-changing relationships are formed and fostered. My preaching, the worship music, the donuts, all of those things will not ultimately keep you connected here. They won't. There are better preachers out there. There are probably not better worship teams. I should say that because my wife's, part of it. There's probably better coffee and donuts somewhere. Like, you can get any level of that you want almost anywhere. Thank you, Internet. So those things won't keep you connected here, in my opinion. What will keep you connected here are meaningful relationships with others. And that is ultimately what will keep you connected to this community. That's the purpose of this community or this gathering, is that it would birth those life-changing relationships for each of us. And so here's the question for us to kind of wrestle with as we wrap up this morning. And that is this: am I making space in my life to be in regular, meaningful relationships with others? Am I making space in my life to be in regular, meaningful relationships with others? Notice I didn't ask, do I have space? I know the answer to that. You don't. But you got to make it. You got to make it. You do not have the margin. I get it. We host life group at our house. Some of that is because it forces us to clean our house, which is helpful. I'm kidding, kind of. But Kendra can tell you, like, we host it Sundays at 4:30. There have been a few Sundays where at like 2:30, we're like, we got a life group tonight. And it feels like, man, I got 12 other things that I could use tonight for. I'd like to take a nap. I'd like to not have to go cook 50 chicken legs on the grill. Like, that's to be human, is to go, I don't know how I can make this work. I've been there, trust me. But then every time when the group leaves our house, we're just filled up. Like, this is so right. So the question is, am I making space in my life to be in regular, meaningful relationships with others? I should also say, life groups are not the end-all, be-all. There are other capacities that this can happen. So that question is general, but one of the things that we've tried to do is go before you to say, let us help with that if it's something that you desire to be a part of. And I'm not talking about the spaces that our schedule forces us to go each day. Like, you got to go to work, and you should have meaningful relationships there. I'm talking about intentionally carving out time, recognizing that our time is so limited, so valuable, to invest it into meaningful, life-changing relationships with other people. That's really what I'm after. The Great Commission engine requires all three pistons to be firing in one motion if we're going to be obedient to Jesus' command that we go and make disciples. Life-changing relationships, we believe, are such a critical part of that equation. And we've been anticipating today for a while, because we are hoping that there will be some more of you that step forward to the point where we're overwhelmed and we're like, okay, we need more groups. That would be a good problem to have. But a lot of our groups still have space, and maybe that space is for you. Maybe that space is for your family today, to be in relationship with other people in a way that they can help lift up your arms when they're weary. That's the picture in Exodus in the Old Testament, right? When Moses' arms grew tired, there were people there to hold them up. And that's the spirit of life groups, it's the heart of life groups. And from that, life-changing relationships are formed and fashioned. So we want to be a community that's marked by love and committed to making disciples, and we think that happens in those relationships. Let's pray together. Father, thank you so much for your faithfulness to us as a church. Not even really 3 years old, and yet so just richly blessed to see the number of groups that are already in place and more soon to come. So blessed to see the number of people that have taken this step to engage. And whether it's life groups or whether it's something else, I pray, God, that you would nudge us today. You would convict us today around maybe how we've used some of our time selfishly. Maybe it's someone else that needs that time, those life, for us to step into that relationship with them. So God, I pray that you would show us today. You would show us what that next step would be. And that you would show us maybe, is there something in our life that needs to be tweaked so that we can invest in these meaningful relationships as you've so designed it. You've made us relational beings. You've given us relationships. They are your good gift to us. May we steward them well. May we use our lives to bless others in the context of relationship, that we would understand that our struggles, our gifts, our dreams and desires, all of those things are best shared when we share them in the context of community and relationships with others. So let this be a catalytic moment where so many say, hey, we're ready for that. We want to be known. We don't want to be isolated, but we want to be known. We want to be loved. May the gospel